Twitter has been asked by the government to block 1,178 accounts for allegedly spreading misinformation on the farmer protests and provocative content, and said today the orders were inconsistent with Indian law and that for some accounts it would restrict access within India instead of an outright ban. In a blog listing the action it's taken, also conveyed to the centre today, Twitter noted that the values that underpin the open internet and free expression are increasingly under threat around the world. In an escalating confrontation, the government replied on Coup, KOO, which has been pitched as Twitter's Indian rival. But Twitter has made it clear, as far as blocking the accounts of journalists, activists and political leaders, in many cases where requests have recently been made, they won't do it. Well, joining us now, Tuhin Sinha, the BJP leader, Raman Chima is the Asia Pacific Policy Director of Access Now, and Sanjay Hegde, the Supreme Court lawyer. Mr. Sinha, what do you expect the government to seriously do at this stage?
Well, in response to Twitter, if I may ask Twitter, does Article 19 of the Indian Constitution exempt certain individuals stated by Twitter from the provisions of law? Does Section 153A or Section 295A of the IPC exempt those individuals, whether they are activists, politicians, or journalists? So you need to understand that the Indian government has been exceptionally patient when it comes to freedom of expression. I can give you instances when people have wished death for the Prime Minister, Supratim Chatterjee, if I'm not mistaken. There are people who have abused the Prime Minister.
Yeah, but there are people who abuse everybody, right? There are people who've abused Rihanna. There are people who've abused Kamala Harris's niece. There are people who abuse. The people who've abused me today also. People abuse on Twitter. That's an unfortunate reality.
My point. Wishing death at a rally is a little different from abuse. I hope you would agree with that. Anyway, my larger point is that the government has been rather patient on that count, but when it comes to national security, you have been through the trauma of the 80s when, you've seen firsthand what the Khalistani terrorists have done to the country. Today, these wars are fought over internet. When there is definite information that there are certain actions which are stoking the Khalistan movement.
So let me get a response.
Within its rights.
Right. Mr. Hegde, that a lot of people would say that response is valid, that there is a serious apprehension that some of these accounts may be linked to Khalistani activists, terrorists, call them whatever, and therefore they need to be blocked. Do you believe that that's a fair request from the government?
Well, the fairness of the request is to be determined by Twitter, which is figuring out whether it wants to comply or not. You can dub anyone Khalistani. You can say that any speech is inciting riots. Now, if the government of India were to say that an Amul ad, for instance, is inciting the farmers, can it ask Twitter to shut down? So Twitter's position seems to be that we will abide by all lawful, reasonable requests. But there are bigger questions on freedom of speech. You know that I and Twitter have had a fight.
Yeah, I know your account was closed down, which just raises the point.
Why was my
Twitter
account
randomly
closed down?
shuts down accounts? I don't know. Is it their software which is problematic or what? In your case, that's what happened, right?
It was not the software. It was Twitter determining that they could shut down any account which they determined to be violative of their platform. So if it deliberately misread an anti-Nazi photograph to be a Nazi photograph, I had no recourse.
And that's a machine that reads it in so many cases.
Yes, so therefore I had to go to court. It's absolutely crazy. So my point is simply this. You cannot trust social media companies like Twitter, Facebook to be their own policemen. Equally, you cannot trust governments to be policemen of free speech, because traditionally governments don't like free speech. What you need is independent regulation, fair regulators, and those would probably have to come from the courts.
Raman Chima, where do you see this actually going? Do you really think that the government is going to potentially push to have Twitter executives locked up? Would you see India regressing into a state like China, which doesn't have Twitter, or in certain instances Russia, which is not free by any means? Is that where we are headed in this battle between the government and Twitter?
Yes, I think we should be very concerned about where we're headed because the status quo already isn't good by any regards. I think we need to recognize the problems that exist in the Indian Republic. We have now nearly hundreds of now perhaps 1,000+ instances of web content being asked to be blocked in this particular circumstance. We have seen websites being blocked in the past. And remember, all these orders are secret. You don't know what's there. You don't know the justification, which is the biggest concern, right? If a government is taking extraordinary steps that impact free speech and fundamental rights, the Indian Constitution says what they're doing may be permissible provided they meet certain tests. And those tests require orders to be public, so you can challenge them. The Indian government, particularly the present government with the Ministry of Electronics and IT, is unfortunately asserting they have a confidentiality obligation on all these orders, and that's quite extraordinary. India already leads the world in the number of internet shutdowns we issue. In 2019, we were far ahead of the next two countries, which are Venezuela and Yemen. And that's something that should be concerning us. And that's today the crisis point where we're at. And I think the crisis is a good thing because it's opening our eyes to the fact that we have a censorship mechanism when it comes to web content as well as for internet shutdowns, where there is no accountability. There are no judges reviewing these orders. They're only civil servants. They are only reviewed by civil servants later. These orders are kept secret, and one has to fight to determine what's being acceptable or not. And in the present case, the question I do want to leave you with is, do you think that blocking journalists on social media platforms is ever generally acceptable by government? Are news magazines being accused of facilitating terrorism or of being linked to banned prescribed organizations? And that's the important issue also in India. We do have laws that allow for the prescribing of organizations. It's precise and it's clear. You can't say that any communication with a banned organization is somehow illegal. By that logic, Vishnu, if you speak to a member of a banned organization, the Babur Khalsa or somewhere else, your interview should not be allowed to be telecast according to the argument that the spokesperson is making.
Yeah. In fact, Mr. Sinha, last just 30 seconds to you because I'm running short on this. Twitter, you quoted a couple of the laws and you asked, and it's a valid question, that look, this is what the laws in India say. Who is Twitter to say that they will not listen to the laws? Twitter's interpretation is, and I quote from what they said today, "We do not believe that the actions we have been directed to take are consistent with Indian law, and in keeping with our principles of defending protected speech and freedom of expression, we have not taken any action on accounts that consist of news media entities, journalists, activists, and politicians." So in other words, Twitter is saying, look, you can say what you want as government, but we believe you're wrong, and therefore it means they're willing to go to court for it. So is that where this is headed?
It's a little rich on the part of Twitter to preach us provisions of Indian law,
considering
considering their own credibility is at stake. Look at the way they have.
No, but why is it rich for Twitter to be teaching you law? You can disagree with you can disagree with Twitter, but why is it rich on Twitter's part to teach you law? Twitter's lawyers in India are Indians.
The very fact that Twitter
the law is written in English, you can understand it irrespective of where you're from.
The very fact that Twitter blocks Donald Trump based on its own judgment and holds him responsible for capital attacks shows its malafide intent. Did it wait for the courts to decide whether Donald Trump was responsible for the Capitol Hill riots? So the very fact that Twitter has been acting in an arbitrary manner shows that it has malafide intent. And
Twitter is willing to back up its actions in court. Is that where this is headed?
Sure, I mean,
possibly yes.
So that yes.
I think it's almost inevitable. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us, because I've also got Shobha De, who's spoken to us about her views on this battle between Twitter and the government. Thank you, Shobha, very much for being with us. Sure. Now, the Twitter statement is quite incredible, considering that they have such a huge presence in India. It seems that they don't want to kowtow to the government, at least not yet. I'm just going to read a line. "We do not believe that the actions we have been directed to take are consistent with Indian law. In keeping with our principles of defending protected speech and freedom of expression, we have not taken any action on accounts that consist of news media entities, journalists, activists, and politicians." Where is this headed?
Well, it seems like an all-out war that the government is not likely to win, quite honestly, because the genie is out of the bottle. We know everything tells us that those 140 characters can be lethal. One tweet can start a revolution, and no government in the world has been able to challenge it sufficiently Instead, I think what we should be doing is handling unpleasant comments, any kind of controversy, with more maturity ourselves. Instead of overreacting, Twitter is not going to toe the line. They're not going to behave like, penitent schoolboys and schoolgirls and say, okay, government of India, we are so sorry, hame maaf kar do. It's not going to happen. So this kind of an appeal, even or even a request from our government is not showing a democracy, a democratic state in a wonderful light. I mean, they're not going to listen to despots. What are we planning to do? How do we counter this? Because their statement is very unambiguous. And if you ask me, I mean, the freedom of expression is really non-negotiable in a democracy. You can't be selective about it. You can't say, we will choose the freedoms that our citizens are entitled to. We decide how much freedom is good and how much is bad. We decide what's harmful content, what is permissible, etc. So it's going to be a tough war, and they have taken a position. So let's see what we do next. We know how we reacted to the Rihanna tweet. Had we just ignored it, come on, it wouldn't have generated sort of worldwide mockery and lots of memes which we could have avoided by just ignoring an entertainer. She had her time. There was one tweet and she probably moved on to something else. But there we were, the entire government machinery, focusing on countering what she had said.
Right.
Why don't we deal with it with more sense?
We were reacting to the sovereign republic of Rihanna. That's what we were doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Shobha, the news is that apparently you'll be moving to the new platform Coup. Is that correct?
Absolutely not. I don't know who on earth has mentioned that.
No, I'm joking. I'm being facetious. You're not, right? But it seems bizarre, doesn't it, that there would be a counter Twitter?
It's crazy because, well, you can try it, and there may be a few extremely pliant people out there who are busy, following the government's diktat and using amicable tweets to make a point in the Rihanna controversy. Maybe they have shifted their account, but there's no question. I mean, Twitter is here to stay. Whether we like it or not, and it's impossible to fight and wage a war against a powerful platform like this, which in their statements they've talked about what they believe it's their mission statement. Deal with it the best you can, or behave like the Chinese or behave like some other despotic countries. Tell your people, tell the citizens of India that this is how it's going to be. And we are going to be selectively picking on accounts, people, journalists, public thinkers, public intellectuals who don't, play footsie with us. We are going to request Twitter to pull down their accounts, not let them tweet, etc. It's a war. No one's going. I mean, the government is not going to.
So,
sorry,
Shobha, there was a tweet earlier today, and I found the power dynamic in this tweets incredible. This was on a meeting which was supposed to be held between Twitter and the Ministry of Electronics and IT officials, where they've tweeted today, upon the request of Twitter seeking a meeting, the Secretary IT was to engage with senior management. In this light, a blog post published prior to this engagement is unusual. What I find bizarre is what stops a blog post from coming in the way of an engagement. It's like you meet us first, then you blog what you need to. Why can't it be the other way around?
The whole thing, the
you
dynamics
blogged
of
before
it,
you met me. That's terrible. You can't be doing that. That's what I'm trying to get at. And that's the drift of this tweet.
It's really baffling because the whole management of this controversy or the crisis, as the government might like to call it, has been ham-handed and it's been completely clumsy. So I really don't know what they're planning to do next. You can't sit on your high horse and expect, Twitter or any other platform in the world to come around and say, okay, Government of India, we'll do as we are instructed by you. It doesn't work like that.
But it's not just Twitter now, is it, Shobha? It's also YouTube, content put on YouTube. A lot of companies and Facebook, the dozens, not dozens, I'm sorry, the thousands of requests to take off content, not just what people type, but also video as well. Some of it very legitimate. That's not in debate. But a lot of it is utter rubbish. And yet, despite what the laws say, this is not just a trend. This is what the government does in our country more than any other country, perhaps.
Yes, but the point is that either, it's like saying, it's about like the Lycra ad, either you have it or you don't. So it's like saying either we believe in freedom of expression or we don't. And where does one draw the line and who draws that line? It's going to be very hard to keep filtering and keep saying, okay, this is not okay, this is going to incite violence. These are, anti-nationals, and these are people from across the border. These are people who are misusing the freedom of expression in India for propaganda. Yes, all of it may be completely true, but how do you counter it? Today, it's a question of, platforms like Twitter, Facebook, etc. are out there, and it's next to impossible to dictate rules and regulations that you'd like them to adhere to.
But Shobha, let me ask you this. Isn't it also strange that the Maharashtra government would order its own inquiry to look into conspiracies by celebrities and sports stars for tweeting whatever it is? So, it's a conspiracy or tweet. If you have tweeted something, it is a conspiracy. If I have tweeted something, it is a conspiracy. One government will go after you, another government will go after me. That's the state in India today. And that needs to be condemned also, what Maharashtra has done.
Completely, because this is, selective targeting. And these are the very celebrities created by this very government in Maharashtra at some point or the other. The previous government, whoever has created a roster of celebrities who tweeted amicably, well, it's their right to do so. Who can tell a Sachin Tendulkar or a Lata Mangeshkar or any of them that, hey, listen, you have no business to be saying that and supporting what you did. It is, as much as we are defending freedoms are for everybody. That includes even those who the government in Maharashtra may consider as part of some sort of a conspiracy favoring the government at the center. Even if that is so, they still have the right to go ahead and tweet as they choose. And this inquiry is meaningless. It is seeking publicity. It is seeking to draw attention, to play politics. And, the controversy itself is dead and over. So, get over it.
Thank you very much indeed.